Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. We are absolutely thrilled to have Catherine Choe with us. Catherine, first of all, welcome back. And with that, Roxanne, I'm going to pitch it over to you.
Catherine, this is a real treat. Thank you for taking time to chat with me.
I'm always happy to talk to you, Roxanne.
The feeling is very mutual. And maybe if you could start off, could you talk a little bit about your path into compliance, your career, and now your time at Zendesk?
Yeah, it's kind of a circuitous path to where I am now. I started out as a lawyer and hated that. Went to a consulting firm and then went to another consulting firm where I did a lot of work with Fortune 2000 legal departments and compliance departments, talking about best practices research, working with customers on figuring out how to apply the findings of the company that I worked for to their own situations. And then after that, felt like I wanted to get my hands a little bit more dirty, for lack of another word, and work with customers directly to actually put those practices into effect at their companies. And I've just been freelancing in a lot of different areas and then started in legal ops as a contractor at Google, then ran legal ops at a company called Everlaw, and am now at Zendesk as chief of staff for the legal department, also responsible for operations, but as you might imagine, with some very strong opinions about compliance.
No, never. Tech, strong opinions. I've never seen it.
Which is how we met.
Yeah. We'll get to that. A good story. I love the background. And as a consultant for approximately 1 year, we both high-fived that industry.
Yes.
And then said goodbye. So maybe I'd actually love to know, what did you learn from your sort of time there in terms of best practices that you've kept with you going forward? I know you do have strong opinions on both what good looks like and maybe more importantly, like what bad looks like. Would love to hear a little bit of the Catherine's best practices playbook.
Yeah, I think the thing that we often forget in whatever function we're in, but including compliance, is we go in and everybody I've met who's worked in compliance has the best intentions, right? It's people who are attracted to doing the right thing and so are passionate about that. But sometimes that passion can get in the way, and that you sort of forget that while compliance is our job, it's not necessarily the full-time job of everybody at the company. So while it is their job to be compliant and to follow the rules and do the right thing, it's not something that they think about on a daily basis. And so we often go in with legal backgrounds and are like, you need to know that there is something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and Congress passed it in the 70s, and it does this thing. And we waste attention span and bandwidth on people learning the law rather than what it is they're actually supposed to do in their day to day. So I think that's one thing, is that it's really hard to balance perfect and practical.
Yeah. And I'm hearing like a real design-centric approach, almost a customer-centric approach, where the customer is that engineer, is that salesperson, versus I'm the customer, compliance, what do I like?
Yeah. Because I don't think most employees are not in it to do the wrong thing. But when you tell them, oh my gosh, there are all these laws you need to know about, like, I don't need to know what section of the California Penal Code says that murder is against the law, right?
Yeah.
I just know I'm not supposed to do it. I don't need to know what the specific chapter and verse is not to speed, but I know that I shouldn't speed when I'm driving. I guess murder is kind of an extreme example.
It's personally, so I appreciate, yeah.
But the behavior that I'm supposed to engage in is really clear without me knowing all of the other things.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the challenges that any function that has to deliver training as part of their remit is really up against.
Yeah. When I first started at Athena, I was selling to a tech company. I can't remember exactly what they did, but let's say they made some cool hardware thing. And I remember the buyer so clearly said, you, Athena, have a mission. Our mission is to improve human mobility or something. And so you need to fit into our mission, not the other way around. And I was like, that is great advice to hear.
That's amazing advice. What a gift.
I know. I think direct feedback can be so powerful, because otherwise people are thinking it, right? And if you don't know it, then you're just missing out on that information.
Yeah.
So maybe kind of sticking with thinking about really the employee being the customer of compliance, and how do you help them versus lecture at them, finger wag at them, wish that they spent 90% of their time thinking about compliance, et cetera. How have you operationalized that, whether it's your training program, whether other components of it, like maybe a couple examples of how that comes out day to day?
Yeah. So before we had a chief compliance officer who started in February of this year, we had our compliance training was something like 3 hours long, sort of reflecting the gravity and the importance of the behavior that we wanted people to engage in, but really underestimating the appetite, or I should say, overestimating the appetite
Yeah.
of the people learning, because then compliance training is something to be endured rather than consumed.
I love that distinction. That's a great way to
And
put it.
something that's endured is not necessarily something that's absorbed and processed, and there's no behavior change. So, a lot of my work, and I'm very happy that our chief compliance officer is here now, taking responsibility for that. But a lot of it was really working with the subject matter experts to say, you're giving people 45 slides that they have to read. They're just not going to read all of them. I know that they should. I know that it's for the best of the company to do it. I know that there are a lot of good reasons. They're just not going to. So, what is it that you actually need them to do? And can you say that in a way that's really short and catchy?
Yep. I love that. And then you guys went a step forward and I think did something so innovative. I see a lot of companies both do it or wish they could, but haven't gotten there yet from an operational perspective, which is you offered test out, which I think is so profound because if the idea is similar to being someone in a student, if you can demonstrate knowledge, usually you don't have to sit through the class, right? That's the whole point. Could you talk a bit about how you thought about test out, in particular, it fitting into this idea of being really employee centric?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of sympathy for compliance functions because part of the reason we want things perfect is that there might be a third party looking for documentation that we did the things that we were supposed to do. So you're balancing everybody did the things that they were supposed to do versus being able to prove that you told them what they were supposed to do. Test out is so nice because for people who are not new to the workplace and are generally wanting to do the right thing, it gives them the opportunity to demonstrate, I know what to do when something happens, and I don't have to spend an hour out of my day. And sometimes an hour feels like a lot to give up depending on what's happening. But you think, oh, it's just an hour. It might be an hour in a 12-hour day.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And so test out really allows people to think. We don't make the questions easy. I did push a little bit. I pushed with the compliance council who was building the test out questions to make them maybe a little bit easier. And she was like, no, these are things that they actually really need to know. And so I think we landed in a really good place where the test is not easy. I didn't get 100%. I'll just confess that now. But for the people who answered enough questions, I did answer enough to pass and not have to take the course. It means that I spent 15 minutes sort of demonstrating that I knew what I was supposed to do in nuanced situations and gave the company both the comfort and the documentation that I knew what to do, and also saved me 45 minutes in what potentially might have turned into a 13-hour day.
I was so excited to hear you all launched it really successfully, because I also think something you said earlier about sometimes compliance can maybe equate hours of training with hours paying attention. And my suspicion is that if employees are able to test out of a lot of modules because they demonstrated that knowledge, they are paying much more attention to the modules they didn't test out of versus if you just kind of talk at them for 3 hours and by minute 23, they may have not tested out, but checked out. And then unfortunately, minute 47 was what you really wanted them to pay attention to. That's just a devastating way to try to impart knowledge.
It's so hard. When I was a compliance consultant, I can't tell you the number of times I started to lie about what I did because people would start confessing their compliance sins. Here's the way that I got around the travel and expense policy. And here's how I got my assistant to take my compliance training for me. It's just like so painful.
Yeah. And then in particular, if like in the second example, which I've absolutely heard many people confess this to me as well, about having someone else take the training, it's a little bit like it may actually have been better to just not issue training, right? If you're actually sort of encouraging like a culture of lying, like that is really, I think, missing the broader idea, which I think you all do so well. Of this ties to our culture, this ties to our values, this ties to our like business reputation. And therefore, when we're going to do something, let's do it really well. Let's do it with intentionality.
Yeah. The team is so good about that, making sure that they talk about the why. A lot of that goes back to my boss, the chief legal officer. It's really important to her that we make clear the why in everything that we do, because we're so often sometimes feared or misunderstood. Nobody knows what legal does. Nobody knows what compliance does.
Yeah.
They do know that we show up when something goes wrong. And so it's potentially a discouragement to giving us a call when we could be really helpful since we're all on the same side.
Yeah, I think that speaks to like actively building a speak up culture, right? Like you want people to come to compliance, and everything you do kind of makes them either more or less likely to do that. Sort of, yeah, employees are like kids. They pay attention to every little thing, you know, and like how you make them feel. Like,
Yeah.
this is a bit of a curveball, but I feel like it's on everyone's mind. Do you have a sense, a guess of how AI is going to impact the compliance world?
Oh,
Not to make you have a crystal ball, but I'm just curious if you sort of have a sense there.
I think AI is going to be really useful in maybe taking disparate data and disparate signals and helping us predict where the biggest risk areas are in the company for potential misconduct. So that when you have scarce resources, you can couple the, because that's a little bit what test out is about, is making sure that we're allocating scarce resources the right way. But knowing that very few companies have the travel and expense budget to fly somebody to every single location and get in front of every single employee live, I think the data analysis that AI could help us do might be able to point us in. It might be this country, this specific office to predict something like the AI is seeing signs. I would really love to see AI also help us figure out. I think the easiest way to get compliance is to make it easier to comply than not to comply. So easier to do the right thing, harder to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And I wonder if AI can be helpful in identifying where those choke points are, where you have to work really hard to do the wrong thing.
I love that. I love your point on like scarce resources. We, even in sort of a pre-AI way of doing it, we have some customers who will do pulse surveys. How likely are you to come to compliance with an issue? And then they spend their either Zoom or travel-based time, but like in-person time on the 5 sort of lowest scores, like 5 geographic lowest scores. And that's just so clever, because I think sometimes we want to design these programs where it's like peanut butter, like everyone can get spread everywhere. But then you realize with lean teams, like you have so much under your remit, it's just not possible for you to do that in a global organization.
I think that's one of the hardest things about being in compliance is that I think the third parties who are interested in what companies do for whatever reason, maybe something went wrong or for some other reason, sort of ask for that peanut butter approach. Show me that you spread your peanut butter to every single corner of the bread, when that's not how things go wrong.
Yeah.
They don't go wrong equally across an organization. There's always going to be hot spots.
Yeah.
But because we're sort of constrained by this blunt instrument that we're judged against, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to be as effective as possible.
Yeah, that's really insightful, because I was literally today just reading Susan Frank Divers put a blog post up for us, and it was on the ECCP. And so I was just refreshing thoughts. And it's funny that a lot of the guidance says, yeah, focus your training on past issues that have happened, be role and risk based. But that you're right that like when the rubber meets the road, sometimes it can feel a little bit like, hey, show me green check boxes next to every person versus show me how your training program was thoughtful, intentionally built, personalized. And it's almost easier. I can see why if you're a auditor, it is easier to do the former, but it is more accurate to do the latter.
Yeah. It's tough. It's a really difficult push-pull to be in and to find that balance. Because fundamentally, if everything goes well, then none of those third parties will be knocking on your door, right?
Yeah.
They won't have any reason to. But also, nothing in life is perfect. And so if something goes wrong, you want to be able to say, we did the best we could, and be able to document it and show that what you did was high quality and effective. It's definitely a pickle, and I do not envy my compliance colleagues at the company figuring it out.
Agree. It's a hard balance, but I think it's been neat to see how many different innovative approaches people have taken to acknowledge scarcity of resources and allocate them in like really clever ways. not to make this all about me and Athena, but maybe one last question, which is, as a vendor, I think the best thing we can do, kind of to my earlier point on that customer telling me like, hey, my business is my priority, is be really open to feedback and be really responsive to customers. And I'd love to hear your experience, good, bad, indifferent, with our support, our responsiveness. I find that customers are both say it best, and candidly, people believe them more than
Yeah. So I think when I first came to Zendesk and was going through our 3 hours of training, and I wanted to go in and be a good citizen and take this training, and some of it was just, it wasn't there was a lot about it that just wasn't quite right for Zendesk.
Yep.
And I was very vocal about it to you and the team that supports us. And to your enormous credit, I think in 4 to 5 months, the main training that we had an issue with had completely changed in tone and was much more targeted, was much more what we needed. And there were other changes in other places that were also very helpful, just in terms of the modularity of the courses, being able to make adjustments as we needed. This test out thing is such a game changer. We had several people very high in the organization who are asking us, why can I not test out of this? Like, I've been working for this many decades. I fundamentally pretty much the same wherever you go. Why am I sitting through this whole thing? And so being able to say, we are valuing your time as well as the time of everybody in the organization is really valuable. I really appreciate how open you are to feedback, because I think I came into our first meeting pretty hot.
I am really here for it, because I think, one, you learn something from every conversation, but two, a challenge, but a cool opportunity we have is we support so many different kinds of companies. We've got federal contractors, you got geographic diversity, we have different industries. And so we know that a one size fits all approach to training just doesn't work, because I think kind of what you're saying is the training needs to reflect your values and like the message you're sending and all of it. And so I think the most powerful thing we can do is build tools that give you a bunch of knobs to tweak it so it's just right for you. And if like good enough isn't good enough, if you need to change happy to glad, like we want you to be able to do that and then translate it into 12 languages. And I think that's where my crystal ball, which is very bad for AI, is I think it's just getting really exciting, where you can say yes to all of these requests. And I'm personally very glad that you guys want to test out so badly, because I want to test out so badly. It's just like a feature that should live in the world.
Absolutely.
Really exciting. Catherine, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and your humor. I'm here for both of them. Tom, would love to invite you back on to close us out.
Catherine, that was just delightful. I've known Catherine. She was one of the first people I met when I went out on my own as a compliance consultant. She has been one of the stalwarts of our community. She's worked in, as she detailed, a variety of roles, and the breadth and scope of her knowledge in compliance is really second to no one. I just wanted to thank you for sharing your thoughts with our audience and with Roxeanne. That was just great. I hope we can manage to get you back to talk some more. Catherine, thank you. And Roxeanne, thank you. And thanks to all of our listeners.
Thank you for inviting me. It was such a pleasure to see both of you.
Same.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.